Well, in Europe, the centralizing power of the papacy and monarchies are moving forward in the late 11th into the early 12th centuries, and it will stretch into the 13th. We want to take a second look for our purposes in Western development at what's happening in Eastern Europe, and that is especially going to be relevant for the occupation of much of Eastern Europe, or the threat of occupation by the Mongol Empire that's going to be in the 13th century. As you have read in some of your sources, the Mongols had been very successful after about the year 1220 CE in organizing a large steppe empire, that huge empire that crosses most of what you know as modern-day China, Mongolia, through much of what you know as Siberia, all the way to the edges of Poland and Hungary. That massive steppe empire was controlled by the Mongols for a number of years, especially starting in the 1220s. And what they had been able to do is they were able to unify their control over China, occupy China, and actually move the capital of China to a place that eventually would be called Beijing. That's one of the things the Mongols will do. What they'll also do is, remember, they are relatively religious tolerant in terms of an empire. They're not interested in people's religious studies. What they're mostly interested in is obedience and tax revenue. So the Silk Road, that long-term trend of calling things back and forth across Asia from the Far East to European markets, which had happened in the late Roman Empire all the way through into, well, even earlier into Alexander the Great's empire, that Silk Road had been maintained. But with the Mongol control of all of Asia, they are going to then be able to move and control all the sources of trade. So in this very simple map here, we're showing you the homeland of the Mongolians. They're going to be called the Horde, and they are going to be controlling in many ways the territories that you know as the modern steppe. All right, this area of Central Asia onto the edges of Europe that is a large area of flatland, and the Mongols move very quickly using their horses. What's also going to be vital for us to note is that remember that not only is the steppe a powerful thing, but the Silk Road, the trade routes that essentially go through many of the cities of Central Asia and take materials to Europe are going to be, of course, controlled by the Mongols. What's going to most be important for the European context is they will occupy most of Eastern Europe, the areas that we know as modern-day White Russia, Russia, onto the edges of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Hungary, but nonetheless, they have great influence further east you go in Europe, and they essentially occupy most of what is the old Kievan Rus and the other princes of Moscow, for example. That area of Europe is now controlled by the Mongols. They are leaving the Europeans there to their devices in terms of some local trade, but they do control most of the tax revenue. And in that scenario, there's two Russian cities that are going to rise to essential power. One will be called Novgorod, and the other will be Moscow, or Muscovy as sometimes it's called. These are the origins of a Russian empire that at first the Russian princes will be serving as a sort of subsidiaries or auxiliaries in tax collection especially for the Mongols for the next 300 years or so on the edges of this empire of the steppe. Take a look inside your textbook for the creation of this large Mongol empire and also its relationship to controlling Eastern Europe, because this is now going to mean that most of Eastern Europe will not be engaged in the Renaissance and it will not be engaged in the Reformation either. So two key elements that will be changing Western Europe will not be impacting much of Eastern Europe as it continues its tradition of being linked to the Byzantine Eastern Orthodox Church as well as being isolated by Mongol authority. Take a closer look inside your reading and make sure you do a closer look inside your practice exams for information about this time frame.